So did you know that it is possible to rob a bank without ever setting foot inside the bank, without any particular set of expertise, knowledge of how banks work, knowledge of security systems? You don't have to run a heist like Ocean's 11 in order to rob the reserves held in a bank. That is because of the hidden tax known as inflation. People often think of inflation as high prices, but actually high prices are not themselves inflation. They are the results of inflation. Inflation is something that happens to the money that results in a change into higher prices. It is a changing of the value of money artificially. If you look at the screen, you can see that $100 in 1913 is now equivalent to $2,591.49 in 2019. Now, 1913 is the creation of the Federal Reserve System of the United States, which gave the government basically an unlimited ability to print money. Now, what inflation actually is concerns an economic principle that pretty much everybody's familiar with, unless they don't know the basics of how economics works. Let's say I have my $20 bill and I decide I would like to buy more money, but I want to get, I'd like to have more money to buy more things, but I want to get something for nothing. So I decide to do something unethical and commit fraud. And in my commission of fraud, what I do is I take my $20 bill, I go over to my copy machine, and I start making copies. And they look real and people believe it. And so I've given them something that they believe is money, when in actuality it is not. No goods or services have been added to the economy justifying that money. I have committed theft, I have committed fraud, I have committed the crime known as counterfeiting, which is the stealing of money or goods and services through the artificial creation of money. Now, counterfeiting or fraud is an economic reality no matter who commits it. There is no magical change that takes place in a person when they work for the Federal Reserve, when they work for the US government or any other government. When they print out money, they are participating in counterfeit. They are participating in fraud. They are participating in a hidden tax known as inflation. As I mentioned earlier, how could you rob a bank without ever going into it? You could do so by printing money without the requisite increase in goods and services or some standard by which money is measured that's reliable, like gold. It doesn't have to be gold, but it could be anything that maintains a store of value. So here's how this works. If you have your money in savings, it can be secretly taxed and drained through the printing of outside money. Because if we just imagine counterfeiting on the individual level, me with my $20, what am I not only doing through my commission of theft, but what am I doing that's so bad? What am I doing that's going to cause an economic problem? Well, if I keep doing it, the money starts to become worth less and less and less. That also applies economically on the scale of anybody else, any entity or any government. the money becomes watered down. So now, if you had $10,000 in the bank saved, and money has been printed outside this whole time, your money has become less valuable. It will start purchasing you less because vendors of goods and services start recognizing that the money is worth less and they start raising prices. Now, it's not a big deal if you end up getting paid 20,000 and now you're paid 40,000 and everything you buy doubles. I mean, it'll find some sort of equilibrium. The problem is the money in savings has been depleted. Not an actual number, but in its value. It has dropped. If you had $10,000 in savings and the money supply, money was printed that doubled the supply of the money in the economy, it's now like you only have $5,000. The government found a way, and others, not just governments, do this, but found a way to counterfeit, to steal your money out of the bank without ever entering into it. And that is what has happened several times throughout history, but in the United States, especially since 1913 and the creation of the government Federal Reserve System. That is why $100 in 1913 is the equivalent now of $2,500, almost $2,600 in 2019. Now that may say, oh, well, my $100 is worth a lot more. No, it's actually the opposite. What $100 would have bought you in 1913 would now take $2,600 in 2019. My sister and I were watching Little House on the Prairie, which takes place in, I believe, the 1870s or 1880s. And one of the girls is working part-time sewing for this seamstress, and she makes $1.70 for a whole week's work. And she doesn't feel she's gotten ripped off. She's excited because this is a huge amount of money for her. I looked over to my sister and we joked to each other. I said, do you remember when the dollar used to have value? She says, no. And I said, neither do I. Because we've grown up in a time under, and all of us Americans have, and have seen it, a time of extreme inflation. The government has taxed us without really having to tax us because they get to use the money first when it's freshly printed. And the economy has not caught up to the fact that there's more money. So they get to use it at its original value level. Then as the money spreads out through the economy, coming down to the poorest levels of the economy last, the money buys less and prices are higher. And so it's not as if, even though this would be unethical as well, to say, well, what right do people have just to save money when it could be used in the economy? So the government prints it and takes it out of their savings in another way and redistributes it. But that savings, that pool of savings is essential for how an economy works, because that pool of savings sends signals through a market and an economy on what interest rates should be. Interest rates are the price on borrowing money, which businesses and other entities use to figure out whether it's a good time to expand or not expand. It also lays a groundwork for greater investment by businesses in capital. Capital is the stuff that makes stuff in an economy: machines, tools, warehouses, trucks, all these type of things that make us wealthier once there's that investment in the right amount in the right time. Well, when it is at the right time? Well, it's the right time when there's a greater amount of savings there to, in a voluntary system, be able to borrow from at a lower interest rate, which is a price on borrowing money. But if they just keep printing the money and they keep manipulating the interest rate, forcing it down, people borrow at the wrong times and they invest in the wrong things. And eventually there has to be a correction. So look at this graph. This is myself over here. The buying power of $100 in 1913 versus the buying power of $100 in 2019. It looks like it's gone up. But what this actually means is $100 in 1913 and how much you would have to spend to have the equivalent of what that used to mean. That now we would have to spend almost $2,600 to get the goods and services that could have been bought for $100 in 2013. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting that 1913 is a better time than 2019. That's economically untrue. There's goods and services available to us now that were never available in 1913. So what can solve this? I think only an enraged populace that puts enough pressure on Congress to end this system of printing money. Because it is theft, it is taxation by other means, it is counterfeit. And many Americans are enraged, they are upset. They do recognize that they're not doing as economically well as they feel like they ought to be. And they're right, or at least their impulse is correct. But often they're not getting mad at the right person. They're getting mad at all kinds of things, or feeling that, we can print our way out of this, or whatever the case may be. But most Americans, and many in Congress, don't have an understanding of how money works. And if you don't have an understanding of how money works, it's much easier to allow inflation to remain the hidden tax, the secret bank robbery that takes place right under our noses, of which we have no idea. So we need to be aware of why this is happening and return to a stable economic system that doesn't allow for this type of inflation through endless and reckless printing policy by governments or any other entity.